Hi, this is Matthew Barbosa, and here's my literature review and analysis presentation video. Introduction. A literature review is conducted to provide a structured overview of existing research on a topic, which may help one understand the current knowledge, identify gaps, and justify one's study. In this case, the topic is appropriate coping strategies for burnout prevention. The research question is, how effective are structured coping interventions in reducing burnout levels among nurses in acute care settings? Background. Burnout is a psychological syndrome caused by prolonged, unmanaged workplace stress, which can be characterized by emotional exhaustion, depersonalization, and reduced personal accomplishment. Burnout develops when nursing demands exceed individual coping resources and persists over time, which is bad for nurses' well-being and professional functioning. Burnout among nurses is a significant occupational health issue which causes many nurses chronic stress. This is significant in nursing because it reduces workforce well-being and retention, quality patient care, and has a bad impact on the organization. Next, we will discuss the methods used for this literature review. First, I searched databases such as PubMed to find relevant resources from within 5 years using search terms such as nurse burnout, coping strategies, etc. And for example, nurse burnout and coping strategies and burnout prevention. The inclusion criteria I used was that it had to be published within 5 years, peer reviewed, and it had to be primary research, focusing on nursing in clinical or acute care settings. Studies reporting burnout outcome and or coping strategies, and I excluded systematic reviews, meta-analysis, mixed method studies, or qualitative only studies. On this slide, we can see my three selected resources and an overview of the resources. For my first resource, I found this document by Wang et al. From 2025, Burnout and Anxiety Among Chinese Nurses, the Mediating Roles of Positive Coping Strategies and Interpersonal Relationship Problems. This study was a cross-sectional quantitative study and mediation analysis examining coping and burnout. The hierarchy of evidence level is level 6, with the sample size being 800 registered nurses. The key findings were that positive coping strategies had significantly reduced emotional exhaustion, whereas maladaptive coping, such as avoidance and denial, were associated with higher burnout levels. Coping strategies mediated the relationship between stress and burnout. This is significant because it shows how important positive coping strategies can help a nurse prevent burnout. And the pattern identified was that effective coping lowered burnout. For my second resource, I found this document by Wodarczyk et al. From 2025, and the title was Factors Influencing Burnout, Stress Levels, and Coping Strategies Among Nursing Staff in Intensive Care Units. The study design was descriptive correlational quantitative study, and the hierarchy of evidence was a level 6 descriptive/correlational study, the sample size being 220 ICU nurses. The key findings to this resource, similar to the previous, was that effective coping strategies would reduce nurse burnout. More specifically, problem-focused coping linked to lower emotional exhaustion, meaning it is more effective, whereas avoidance coping associated with higher depersonalization and burnout, which is not an effective coping strategy. And ICU nurses reported higher stress levels and increased burnout risk, as it's more intense since it is the intensive care unit. Therefore, it can be said that it's important for ICU nurses to find and maintain effective coping strategies to prevent burnout. The pattern identified was the type of coping strategy directly influences burnout severity. Specifically, in this case, problem focus versus avoidance coping. And high stress environments require targeted coping interventions. For my third resource, I found this document by Hella and Matuk from 2024 titled An Estimate of Burnout Prevalence Among Oncology Nurses. This study design was a cross-sectional quantitative survey, with the hierarchy of evidence level being a level 6 descriptive study, and the sample size being 350 oncology nurses. The key findings were that 53% of nurses reported high emotional exhaustion, and this is more than half of the nurses in the oncology nurses in the study. Burnout prevalence remains substantial in specialty nursing areas. And they also found that stress management and coping strategies were associated with lower burnout symptoms, meaning when an oncology nurse or specialty nurse has better coping strategies, then it reduces their burnout symptoms. The pattern identified was that high prevalence highlights urgent need for structured coping interventions, and emotional exhaustion is the most prominent burnout dimension. From these three resources, it can be said that several consistent patterns can be noticed. Burnout prevalence remains high across nursing specialties, i.e., ICU, oncology, even general hospital setting. Emotional exhaustion is the most prominent burnout dimension. It's important for nurses to have positive or problem focused coping strategies, as it can be associated with lower burnout rates. Maladaptive coping, such as avoidance or denial, is linked to higher emotional exhaustion and depersonalization. Looking back at the three studies, the one by Wang et al. Showed that the mediation model of coping can help reduce stress. And the second resource by Wodarski et al. Showed that in the ICU, it's a high risk environment. It's an intense environment, and they require more targeted coping strategies. In the resource by Hella and Matuk, this resource showed that in the specialty of oncology specifically, they found that more than half of oncology nurses have emotional exhaustion, It's, it's important in specialties such as this for them to have positive and problem focused coping strategies in order to lower the burnout rates. These findings suggest that burnout is not inevitable as a consequence of the nursing workload, and instead it shows how important really coping styles play a significant role in influencing the severity of burnout and prevention of burnout. These three studies were correlational, and the consistency of findings strengthens the argument that structured coping interventions may reduce emotional exhaustion and improve resilience. In other words, the better that the nurse copes, the lower the level of burnout. However, since these studies are cross sectional, causation cannot be established, and longitudinal and experimental research is needed. Most samples were from specific regions such as China, Poland, and oncology settings, which limits generalizability. What does this mean for nursing? The implications for nursing are, for one, in nursing practice, it's important to implement structured coping programs, for example, mindfulness, resilience training, stress management workshops, and encouraging peer support and healthy coping strategies in high stress units such as ICU and oncology, and screen regularly for burnout symptoms. Meaning we got to stick together and support each other too. Additionally, for nursing education, the implications for nursing are that we can integrate coping skills and resilience training into the nursing curricula, for example, in nursing school. And we can prepare students for emotional demands of acute care environments. Nursing leadership and policy are also impacted by this, by because we can say that it's important for organizations to develop policies that promote the coping strategies and lower the burnout of their team members. And it's important for the organizations to have policies that ensure safety and staffing ratios to reduce chronic stress and institutionalize wellness initiatives as part of workplace culture. I know for me in my work, all my team members look out for each other, and and we we do screen each other for burnout symptoms, which is fantastic. In conclusion, burnout remains highly prevalent among nurses, particularly in high stress specialties such as ICU and oncology settings. The most common symptom of burnout is emotional exhaustion. Across all three of the resources, it showed that positive and problem focused coping strategies were consistently associated with lower burnout levels, meaning the better that one copes, the lower their burnout levels are. Maladaptive coping strategies, for example, avoidance and denial, were linked to increased emotional exhaustion and depersonalization. Although current evidence is primarily correlational, findings strongly suggest that coping strategies are modifiable protective factors in burnout prevention. Overall, the literature indicates that burnout is not inevitable. Structured coping interventions may play a critical role in reducing its severity and improving the well being of nurses. Addressing burnout through evidence based coping interventions is essential to protecting nurse well being sustaining the nursing workforce, and ensuring safe, high quality patient care. In future research, I would recommend conducting higher level experimental studies and expanding longitudinal and diverse population research. As from these three resources, they were more specific to general nursing, ICU settings, and oncology settings, whereas nursing is very vast and there are so many settings. So more research and resources could be used to find better coping strategies, finding the effectiveness of coping strategies, and the opposite too, like negative coping strategies and the effect on burnout. Here's my references. Thank you so much.